So here in the studio, nobody, including myself, thought that we could get to this point before 1 o'clock, and we have done it. All right, thank God. So our speaker today is Katie Simmons, and Dana, you're going to introduce her.
I am going to introduce her. So I'm very happy to do so. Katie Simmons was hired in 2008 as the executive director of the Paradise Ridge Chamber of Commerce. She is originally from the Bay Area and came to Chico to slow down. A lot has happened since then. She had the opportunity to live and work in Paradise and work with Chuck Rowe and Lauren Gill and really fell in love with Paradise. She's gone through the Humboldt fire, both as a resident and on the periphery of the emergency operations at the town, and as a chamber person had the opportunity to assist the community with messaging and also connecting them with resources. And when she moved down to Chico and spent 7 years as president and CEO of the Chico Chamber of Commerce, working on economic development and community awareness. And then in 2018, she joined the Associated General Contractors of California. Quite a breadth of knowledge. So with economic development, community awareness, and construction, she is super glad to be able to help now in Paradise. Timely person in a timely location. Katie, can we hear from you at this time?
Hi, Dana. Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll listen to that applause. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so I get my slides up. I'm still waiting to slow down. I know that was my original goal when I moved up here and still have not been successful in doing that. Excuse me, but I'm so pleased to speak with everyone today about the recovery process in Paradise as the disaster recovery director. I spent 1.5 years commuting to Sacramento with Associated General Contractors of California, and I was helping to essentially rebuild the 100-year-old construction association when I got a call from Paradise, excuse me, Paradise officials saying we have an even bigger project for you, and they sure did. So at the onset of a global pandemic, I joined the recovery team here at the town of Paradise to help rebuild from the state's most destructive and deadliest fire in our history. So what I'm going to talk about in my presentation is just a quantification of some of the losses from the Camp and North Complex fire that we experienced this year. I'm going to talk about seizing the recovery moment, which is an opportunity that hopefully for our community only comes along once in a lifetime, if ever. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the pace and cost of recovery, because now here at the town, we're talking about $200 million projects, like they just kind of roll off our tongue. So it's pretty amazing the scale and scope of recovery for the town. What I've copied here is a quote that I really love from the Early Warning System Design and Scoping Plan, that the fire was essentially an extraordinary alignment of physical, meteorological, and ecological conditions. So we, of course, here at the town hope that such a fire never happens again. But if a fire comes close, as it certainly did this summer, we hope to be a more resilient and sustainable community. So what I have here is a destroyed and damaged structure map from the Camp Fire. So what you can see on this map are all the little red dots that indicate structures have been destroyed. And you can see, if you look really closely, hopefully, a series of green dots that are scattered throughout the community. So these green dots were standing structures that survived the fire. And the reason I thought this slide was really important to share is so that you could understand that the entire community really was destroyed, and the pieces that did remain are so scattered that the scale of our recovery process has to entail really the entire geography of the town. Maziar is with, he's a Chief Disaster Recovery Officer for the state of California. And at one point this summer, we were experiencing a PSPS event, which means all of our power was out. We had issued an evacuation warning for the North Complex fire, and we were working on recovery. And he just sat in front of us on the virtual screen, and he put his hands together and he said, "Have mercy." And I thought that is exactly the sentiment that I have for the town and this process. So just looking really quickly at the losses, and I'm sure a lot of us have seen these already, but we did have 85 fatalities in the Camp Fire, 18,800 structures burned scar wide, over 27% of the county's mobile home units, which of all the housing stock damaged in Paradise, our mobile home units took the hardest hit. Housing for 10% of the construction workforce. So as you can imagine, Paradise is entering a construction boom. So knowing that we lost housing for a significant percentage of our construction industry, that's obviously a concern we're taking a really close look at. Of the 1,200 businesses we had here in Paradise, all of course closed for a short time after the fire. We have seen about 200 of them reopen. And of course, with the COVID impacts, we're kind of watching those businesses closely. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. For North Complex fire losses, we did have about 2,500 structures damaged or destroyed. So of course, our hearts go out to those who have been impacted. We were very involved in the EOC operations for the North Complex fire. We did issue evacuation warnings, and the town essentially voluntarily evacuated when they could see the smoke clouds, as you can imagine. But we have to take these damaged structures into account when we talk about how recovery is creating an impact for us, not only on the jobs we have available, but the housing units we have available, and the construction workforce and building supplies and materials. So where did everybody go? We know that Chico gained a lot of Paradise's population overnight. As you can see, the majority of folks moving to Chico were in the age range of 30 to 45. A lot of my peers who had children who I was friends with when I lived up here in Paradise had to relocate immediately to get their kids back in school. And then we see that a lot of our older population did leave the area entirely. And so we're kind of watching as we map out all of this information and continue to track where survivors have gone. We see that they are scattered throughout the entire United States. So this map was created fairly shortly after the fire with Chico State support. And what you can imagine with recovery is the amount of contact we have to have with property owners for big projects like debris removal or tree removal does require us to reach out to our property owners who live far and wide. So this is a challenge that a recovering community has, whereas in communities where folks live right outside of the city hall, we really don't have the benefit of convening people, of course, due to COVID, but also because they're living elsewhere. So the recovery moment is really significant, and a lot of specialists in disaster recovery reached out to me right away when I took the job. They were instant friends and confidants and mentors. They've been very supportive. Obviously, a lot of eyes are on Paradise. Initially, of course, because of the disaster, but now because of our recovery progress. Other communities, such as those up in Oregon, for example, contact me at least weekly, sometimes every other day, asking for us to send descriptions of programs that we've created. They're asking if they can get references for the contractors we're working with on a lot of our major recovery projects. So all eyes are on Paradise still, really now because of our recovery. So we're repositioning Paradise to have greater influence in state legislation on fire prevention and planning. We know that Paradise, for example, sits in a high fire severity zone, and this is something that is under scrutiny in terms of allowances for building in WUI cities. And so we're just making sure that we're speaking with our lobbyists, both on the federal and state level, to make sure that what we've learned from this campfire, those lessons can be brought to bear so that we can help other communities mitigate from disasters of this magnitude, and also so that they understand what preventative measures, of course, you know, there's really no point in looking back, but that we maybe could have put into place, not that would have stopped the fire, excuse me, because as you saw from my earlier slide, it moved at a rate of about 80 football fields per second, but so that we can make our community a little more resilient to fire. And I'll talk about those projects in a minute. We're also increasing our emergency management coordination with regional cooperators. So this includes the city of Chico and the county. The county and the town hop into EOC mode quite frequently. As a matter of fact, I think we've done it 4 times since I've been here. We just had a grass fire happen yesterday, so we're always on our toes. But we want to make sure that as we coordinate traffic flow throughout the counties and the surrounding counties and all the way through the North State, that we're paying really close attention to the instructions that we're providing to the community when we ask for evacuations, and also so that people understand what their options are. As I said, building back with greater resiliency and those hazard mitigation projects that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, those are really, really critical, not only for us to sort of harden our community, but also to allow those who are still living in Paradise or are considering rebuilding, who are thinking about becoming an investor in Paradise or potentially purchase a second home or land up here, so that they feel safer living in Paradise going forward. And then, as I said, we're really becoming a model of recovery for other communities. So who rebuilds a town? Lots of us. I am the disaster recovery director, as I said, so I'm coordinating a lot of the agency efforts around major projects like debris removal and tree removal. We have a lot of projects funded under FEMA public assistance. A lot of the immediate recovery projects are coming from FEMA funding, but a lot of those recovery projects are actually administered by the state. So we work really closely with Cal OES, Cal Recycle, and other state agencies. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the local and regional cooperators. And of course, we're working very closely with the residential and commercial owners. And you can see here a photo of our Building Resiliency Center, which was a Tier 1 project in our long-term recovery plan. And we were successful in opening what we call the Brick here on Skyway in a building donated by Bank of America. And so just yesterday, we reopened to the public with masks and appointments still in place because our planning department is very, very busy, heavily staffed by contractors who we brought on board because of the permit volume following the fire. So one of the things I constantly remind people of is that we could quickly put Paradise back together if we were to rebuild at the building standards that a lot of our structures had in place pre-fire. But that's not exactly what we're doing. We need to make sure our new structures are insurable, that they're WUI compliant, that they meet the building codes and standards that the town set after the fire. And we also have to make sure that we're planning and putting giant infrastructure projects in place in a way that makes sense to support the population as it grows. And I'll talk about those projects in a minute. So as of last week, we had issued 426 certificates of occupancy. These are homes that have been rebuilt since we opened the Brick in the middle of 2019. And that's really significant because if you think about the 9 years preceding the fire, the town actually issued 15 building permits annually per year in those years leading up to the fire. And in the last year alone, we have issued over 1,100 building permits. So we have had to expand our entire staff in every department to be able to deal with the volume of demands on public services. And as I said, a lot of those services have been contracted out. And then people do ask me, of course, are you thinking that potentially the building permits have plateaued? And we don't think so at all. Looking at other communities going through recovery, they usually don't see a spike for a few years out. And I'm going to talk about sort of some of our projections in a moment. So first, the cost of recovery. It's very expensive to put a town back together. I have some little stats here on debris removal, and I know as a commuter on 99 for the year following the fire, I saw the trucks exiting the town with all of that debris, which of course were the personal belongings of our survivors. That was a major undertaking by the state. It was the largest project of its type in California history, and the same is true for our tree removal program, which is one of my special recovery projects that is incredibly complex and requires a lot of agencies and a lot of coordination between both our local agencies, local cooperators like Paradise Irrigation District, PRPD, PG&E, the town, and then the other state agencies who are administering these programs, and of course our tree contractors. So the state is issuing $1 billion in CDBG-DR funds for the disasters, the federally declared disasters in 2018. Butte County was one of the most heavily impacted, and so we will receive a majority of those funds. $205 million is going into the rebuild and reconstruction of single-family homes, and then $55 million of that is the town's allocation for multifamily unit rebuilds. The town's PG&E settlement, $240 million. Of course, after payments are leaving that lump sum, we are working with an investment firm on managing the PG&E settlement, which will provide operational backfill for the town for the next 15 to 20 years as our tax base recovers. We have $121 million in total capital improvement projects over the next 5 years. This is another significant jump from the $6 to $10 million we had pre-fire over a 3-year period of time. And so you can imagine our public works department has grown. I've taken on a lot of public works projects, and we're going to see from these 17 different funding sources some opportunities to match those grants to make sure these infrastructure projects get built. $77.3 million coming in from federal sources that are going to help us entirely reconstruct all of our major roads in town, on system and off system. And this is because the impact recovery has on a town is really significant. So of course the fire came through with a lot of damage, but you can imagine as we remove debris, as we remove trees, the roads are feeling the pinch. And so after a lot of these projects are done, including undergrounding of utilities, we're going to be reconstructing our roads. $68 million went to survivors through FEMA IA. And then we have unsettled insurance claims that I'm also managing. And the state of California provided 3 years of revenue backfill for property taxes because, as you can imagine, that was significantly impacted right away. Want to mention Butte Strong Fund, who has been a big supporter of the town's recovery. They have funded to date 16 projects. Quick snapshot that we put together with Valley Contractors Exchange. We have over $2 billion in construction projects in the county over the next 10 years. This is significant because, first of all, we've never seen a number of this size, but also because the disasters occurring in our county with the Camp Fire and North Complex fires are going to continue to increase that number over time. So as we talk about really quantifying the construction impact and the need for the industry to be present with us over the next decade, we're doing a lot of outreach. I have definitely tapped my network at the Associated General Contractors of California, talking with GCs in the central corridor, north part of the state and the Bay Area to make sure Butte County is on the map for companies, of course, that potentially were impacted by the drying up of a lot of construction pipeline projects due to COVID, who might be looking at where they're going to be work here. And of course, this doesn't mean we're necessarily putting them in direct competition with our local companies who don't have to pay for workforce housing, for example, with their local workforce. This is looking at contractors who are not present currently to do a lot of the major recovery infrastructure projects. So variables in recovery and town revenue. This is a conceptual chart that I wanted to share with you to help you understand how we're kind of internally talking about recovery. So the first little spike here that I have on the chart in blue are the folks who, right after the fire, were meeting with planners, designers, engineers, getting their plans ready to go. These are the folks that have their building permits submitted already or who already have their homes rebuilt. These were the folks that potentially had great insurance and had the financial means to just rebuild right away, and who also had the clarity that they wanted to be in paradise. The next spike in orange are the folks who owned property in paradise before the fire but are unsure if they're going to rebuild. And we're seeing in 2020, we're going to see more of it in 2021 with those CDBG-DR funds becoming available to address the unmet needs. We're going to see people either be able to close that financial gap that they have with rebuilding or settle on, yes, I want to be in paradise, or no, I'm ready to sell. So maintaining unimproved parcels, for example, if you can imagine, weeds, trees, all of that, people are putting thousands of dollars into their unimproved lots to deal with the fuels on their properties to help us control a lot of the fire danger we still have in paradise, and that is very expensive for property owners. So we're going to watch over the next couple of years those decisions be made around, should I sell my property in paradise or should I go ahead and rebuild? So the third category here is really that repopulation spike, and I have put that around 2025, which is when we estimate a lot of these major infrastructure projects will either be done or will have begun. And so we're imagining at that point when those who are still holding on to properties but have decided to sell them, we'll see that turn, those transactions, and we'll see the town start to repopulate. Housing studies done after the fire tell us that 60% of survivors were either uninsured or underinsured, and most are experiencing a financial gap of about $100,000 in rebuilding. So we know that the next couple of years is really our opportunity to help close those gaps and or work with those who are interested in purchasing the properties that become available. So a lot of projects in our long-term recovery plan, which was funded by North Valley Community Foundation. We had a third-party consultant come in and work with the community over a several-month process. And this long-term community recovery plan is essentially what I work from and what I coordinate from every day. We have a series of projects that I've listed here. I'm going to talk about a couple of them individually. So removing dead and dying trees from the ridge is obviously really critical to our ability to recover. The dead and dying trees not only pose a hazard to standing structures, to RVs, to lives, to property, but they definitely create a type of fuel here that is not going to be safe should a fire break out. So we have a lot of fuels here in town, as I mentioned, and as those trees are removed, we're seeing a change in our ecology. So the second spring following the fire created what we have come to call a century worth of growth here on our unimproved parcels, which means that seeds that have been germinating or have been dormant for 100 years germinated in the biochar and popped up. So we have an amazing amount of weeds and growth and brush up here, that some of which is highly flammable, and we have these dead and dying trees. So I'm working with all of the agencies, the county, with over 7,000 property owners in town to make sure we got full enrollment in the tree removal processes, so that when the tree felling begins, the government is going to come in and start removing trees in December. We can get as many down as possible. And our first effort are the trees that threaten the right-of-way and eligible public and private roads. And then we have a second series of grant funds that could be available in a couple of years for what we call the back 40 category 4 trees. And this is going to help us clear the remaining trees on properties which are, as I said, hazardous fuels for the town's fire safety metric, and also do threaten standing structures and people's lives. Early warning system, we did get an advanced planning grant from Hazard Mitigation, and this will be for, essentially we started with the design and scoping plan for the early warning system. If we are successful in grant funds coming from Hazard Mitigation in 2021, we will see the installation of siren towers throughout town. And our community survey let us know very clearly that folks believe the early warning system, which would be connected with cell technologies and other emergency alert systems that both the county and the town operate, would make them feel safer living in the community. So that's another big project, looking at either land acquisition or working with the other public agencies in town to make sure we can install those siren towers, that we're using the best technology out there, that everything is really coordinated. So we have a one-touch warning notification system, and also that we're testing this system and keeping ourselves fresh on training on how to use it. So this will be a really, really big project. It's a tier 1 in our long-term recovery plan, and everybody's really looking forward to that. And that's actually one of my favorite projects to talk about. Sewer service area, starting the EIR for this next year. Going to bring a series of decisions to town council over the next couple of months, really talking about whether we localize or regionalize our sewer service area. As you can see from the map, the areas highlighted in yellow are those on our major corridors that we would connect to the sewer service area. This would allow us to potentially place multifamily developments along the sewer service area because we could build higher density housing. And this would also place that denser population along our major evacuation routes, which is something we absolutely take seriously. And I don't know, how much time do I have? I could talk about this all day. I'll be quick. Comprehensive transportation study. This is going to help us understand circulation in the town of Paradise because, as you can see from this map, we have a lot of dead-end road segments. We have a lot of roads that are missing that last connector piece. We know from the campfire when we evacuated all of our zones at the same time, that created obviously some bottlenecking, and we had some real tragedies throughout the community, but especially along some of our major collectors and arterials. So the master transportation study, we just received a couple weeks ago, $1.8 million grant. That's going to help us understand how to prioritize those funds as we bring them in for connecting our infrastructure for better safety in town and just for better general circulation overall. PG&E is undergrounding 200 miles of utilities in town, and they have completed about between 30 and 50 miles to date. This is going to make the town safer as well because we are eventually planning to have all power lines underground. We are working with our communications providers now on joining the trench. PG&E has created the opportunity for the town to own or to lease out to third-party providers some of the conduit in the trench. So as we work on our broadband feasibility study, we are taking every opportunity to look at how we might, digitize the ridge, but also potentially monetize this as a utility for the town. The broadband feasibility study, we're doing this with Chico State, and that report should be coming to council in December, and we're planning on some action items that are going to correspond with the undergrounding of the utilities project, because as I said, we want to take full advantage of the fact that PG&E is doing all the trenching. The repair that they're doing as they trench the roads is just temporary, so that $77.3 million coming in for road reconstruction and rehab will be done after the undergrounding projects and broadband installation, if we're successful in getting funding for that, are complete. Just a quick slide on COVID impacts for broadband. I think this is true for any community, that the majority of us are now using health services online, and if we have children in the home, they are connected to the internet. So this just sort of goes to show how much broadband is critical infrastructure, not only for economic development, which we've always known, but for quality of life, especially for those of us trying to work and go to school in our homes. So a quick list of businesses that are open in the town of Paradise. Joyland's Candy just had their grand opening a couple of weeks ago. That was super fun and quite delicious. And then there are a number of businesses that I recommend if you're going to pop up to Paradise or if you live here, be sure to be visiting these businesses. We have several businesses coming online as we go along every month. We have our first commercial rebuild in progress. I can't say enough about supporting businesses. That's me wearing my kind of permanent chamber hat, that we definitely want to make sure that we are spotlighting the businesses that are open, that we're supporting them during COVID, and that everybody knows that Paradise is open for business and able to provide a lot of services right here on the ridge. This is a subject really close to my heart, emergency management and PSPS planning. We now know as the town of Paradise that we're going to have no power as we are navigating potential disasters. So this was definitely true with the North Complex fire. We saw all of our traffic signals go down as people were evacuating, which was quite concerning. We've now installed with PSPS grant funds 16 generators on all of our major traffic signals to keep them lit while we are communicating with the community on potential issues. And so emergency management planning and disaster preparedness is something, as I said, I'm really passionate about, and I'm pushing forward a lot of conversations to make sure that we optimize regional cooperation on mapping and evacuation warnings, etc. Let's see, almost there. Just a quick slide on gratitude and perseverance. Recovery is going to be a long process. I received a call from someone in New York City the other day telling me how shocked he was at how slow recovery was moving. And I was like, oh no, you've called the wrong person, because let me tell you what I think. So there's a lot going on. Major infrastructure projects that cost hundreds of millions of dollars take some time. And so we're going to be taking some time doing that while the rebuild occurs. So you can see from this quick map that we see a lot of things really starting to happen on the infrastructure side about 5 to 7 years in. I have a list of references here, and I'd be happy to share my slides because I do quote a couple of studies in here, a lot of really interesting data collected on this disaster because it was heavily studied, because it has never happened before in the state. And so there's a lot of good data points that we're tracking as we map out our recovery process, and also how we measure how we're doing. And then just my contact information, you know, I'm available. I speak with survivors a lot. I answer a lot of questions from attorneys. I answer a lot of questions from investors and construction companies located elsewhere who are interested in bringing their alternative building materials to Paradise or potentially opening a satellite business here. So I'm available for all questions at any time, probably not a lot right now because I think we're at the end of the time, but I'll stop there. And I guess if we have any time for questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Wow. Right person, right place, right time. Katie, such a huge project, billions and billions of dollars, and you know, one of our own here managing that. So congratulations on that position, and the town of Paradise is lucky to have you. If you have any questions for Katie, her email was up there. If you don't get it, you can send an email to me and I can get that to you. But great presentation, and thank you again, Katie. Thank you very much.
Thanks.